Hello, everyone, or should I say howdy, partners? It's the Presence Posse. Here we are welcoming you to another episode where today we're going to talk about presence and transformation. Now, I would like to present for you Bobby Cobb and Danielle McMahon, and I'm Miriam Siegel. And I'm going to start right away by talking about the idea of presence as being with what is, as us only having the present moment. The past is over and the future doesn't exist. And then the idea of transformation. If we only have this moment, what's the transformation? How can even transformation exist? Isn't that a great way to start?
Big question.
Absolutely.
Big question, yeah. So I'm going to get you all looking at that, and I'm just going to do a little technical thing in the background just to make sure that we're all broadcasting where we're supposed to be broadcasting. Please speak.
Danielle, you want to start us off?
I can. So generally we don't do much preparation for these. We just go off the cuff, right? But this one I was like, I think I made the topic presence and transition. And now it's presence and transformation. How did that happen? And so I went and looked up the two words, and transition actually has as a synonym transformation. So they're not that different. And the difference that was in the definition was transformation was more dramatic, right? It was a dramatic change as opposed to transition. And it also had a more positive outcome associated with it as than transition did. So that was just how I started with it for the day. And then Miriam brings up this question, like, how's that even a thing? If we're in presence, that we know we're in transformation or transition. And I think that we have talked about it several times, that we bring our presence into the earth walk that we have, right? Like we still have to schedule and plan, and even though we only have this moment doesn't mean that we don't still exist and function within linear time. We just don't get our focus there. We don't get distracted by that, as Bobby calls time travel. So you want to say something about time travel, Bobby?
Well, I'm sure it'll come up more than once today, but yeah, I kind of want to take Miriam's big question of if this moment is just this moment that's happening right now, how does transformation even happen? And look at that maybe from a different perspective, because if we think of the present moment, or what we might call now is really all we ever have. Mm-hmm. So everything that has happened, is happening, and will happen at some point in the future is happening now. And there may be a now that is not yet in the case of the future, but when that takes place, it will be now. And I read something. I'm wanting to do a little bit more research because the number seems a little bit off. But here's what I read, and it was in a seemingly scientific sounding article. We breathe approximately 22,000 breaths every day. Each breath that we have, according to this article, and this is what I'm wanting to double check, has 10 to the 27th molecules that we are breathing in the half a liter or so that we take in with every breath. And that's a 10 followed by 27 zeros. And in the article, it said it is statistically improbable that in every breath that we take, that we're not breathing in a molecule that was once in Jesus and Genghis Khan and Buddha and Adolf Hitler and basically every person that has ever walked the planet. We make roughly 7.5 billion new red blood cells every hour, which means we've made tens of millions already just on this call. So I would submit that transformation is like one of the only constants, that everything is always changing. And by changing, we can say transforming. It's moving from one thing into another. I was at a whole life festival this weekend, and I did Fred's bliss technique that he's led us through before on this podcast. And that literally, that whole procedure, I do that a lot now. I just have fully embraced the idea of that type of inquiry. I named it the bliss technique because I wanted to have Blum in my acronym to make sure that Fred's getting credit for it. But literally in that technique, you are calling to mind an emotion that causes you a little bit of tension or constriction or discomfort, and just sitting with it, just watching it. And I did it with a room full of about 45 or 50 people. And according to those folks raising their hand, every one of them was successfully able to transform a difficult emotion into something else. In some cases, it was into insights. In some cases, it just dissolved. In other cases, it was into an action that they needed to do that they had been putting off. But I just want to introduce the idea for discussion that transformation and transition and change, any of those synonyms, is really the only constant that we have in the world. And it's happening all the time, really, whether we want it to or not. So the question might be, are we observing it? Are we noticing it? Or are we getting stuck in a repetitive thought loop that makes things seem like they're coming frozen in time? So that was my initial thought as I spent a little time with the 30 minutes that we were gifted this morning because of the tech issue, thinking about it a little bit. How does that hit you guys? Does that seem like off the mark or?
Well, thank you for an amazing description and the foundation, I would say, on which we can base some of our discussion or conversation today. And I'm personally very impressed that you managed to remember all of those numbers and all of the details. That's quite a feat in itself. And it's quite an inquiry. Somebody said to me once, I'm just going to throw this into the mixture. Somebody said to me once, the present moment is always optimistic. And I thought that was an interesting,
Automatic?
Optimistic.
Optimistic. Got it. Okay.
And I had never really thought about it. And it's not necessarily something I experienced sort of consciously, I was consciously aware of. But it kind of fits in with what you describe, because for me, optimism is movement. And I think there's this idea when we talk about the present moment and what is, that people sort of think that the present moment is static. Right? There's almost like frozen in time. There's this moment. and is it ever really ever static? Isn't everything, as you describe, always in motion? because we go from, if you want to use that picture, one moment to the next moment to the next moment. But even so, like the actual moment is movement. And the idea of a moment being optimistic speaks to the flow of energy, speaks to the entire, what can I say, foundation of existence, which is creation and creative, which is motion. So transformation or transition, and I think we can certainly speak to both of those, is constant. We just only experience, I would say, one particle of it at a time or something like that. Does that make sense?
Well, we certainly have limited focus, and I mean, there's only so many things that we can pay attention to. In fact, I remember that stat that Malcolm gave us before we were even the Presence Posse that kind of got us going. And if I remember it correctly, and I may not, so this will not be a feat of memory strength, but I think he said something like in every second, there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 11 million stimuli that we could be aware of, in at least in theory. But you know, our conscious mind can really only pay attention to 5 or 6 or 7 things at a time. You know, that's when we start. If we're going to the grocery store, we get above that number and it's like, okay, I better make a list because I'm not going to remember all of these. I'm not going to keep them all present. So yeah, I think that what we focus on tends to freeze some of that energy that's constantly in motion into place. And you know, I mean, you can look at our bodies are constantly changing. New air is flowing in and out, new blood is being made and destroyed, cells are flaking off all the time. And here is another thing, and I've been writing a couple of articles, that's why these numbers are fresh. According to some estimates, we have 37 trillion cells in our body, and roughly 43% of those contain human DNA. The rest are mold and fungus and bacteria and viruses that are all part of this energetic being that we call Bobby or Danielle or Miriam. But it is in constant flux, constant change. It's never static, except when we look at it and make it so by our mind.
And the processes that you talk about, the body going through, it's a good thing that we don't have to focus on them and pay attention to them and try to control them, right? They're all autonomic processes that happen. And one of the wonderful things that I've heard about how many cells make up our body, the trillions of cells, is pretty much they're always in cooperation.
Yeah.
Right? And that gives us hope as humanity that we can find a way to be in a cooperative state. And I like that, the idea of the present moment being optimistic. I haven't heard it that way before. Miriam just shared it. I have heard there are no problems in the present moment. And that was really hard for me when I first heard it, which was, you know, a long time ago now. And I was like, is that right? Is that right? Could that be? And it took me a long time to really settle with that actually is the experience of the present moment, right? That it's not a problem in the present moment. And still, as we live in linear time, we see things that we judge as a problem, or we judge as something that needs our our focus and our attention, and that we need to either address or get away from. So depending on how we react to that, depends on how our nervous system reacts to that. And that's pretty much automatic too. But the superpower that we have is that we get to, once we become aware of that, make a choice. Right? Like we can choose to stay within that in the next moment and the next moment, or we can choose to transform or go through that transition from a fight flight functioning system to a rest repose functioning system, or we can choose to stay in it once we're aware. But when we're not aware, then we don't have that choice. Right? So the present moment is still presenting itself and we're still functioning within it, but we have that choice of, I think, being in transition with it or trying to be static with it, which isn't always very successful.
Yeah. It's like, excuse me, when everything is in motion, it's like when we look at a river, it doesn't stop, right? It's always flowing, always flowing. And we can, and energy is like that, and air is like that. It's never completely static. And so we talk about going with the flow, right? We go with the flow. We can try and swim upstream. We can try and even, I don't know, dog paddle in place, but or tread water in place. Mm-hmm. And still there's motion. One of the things if you don't mind, I'd like to mention or talk about, because this idea that you brought up, Danielle, about in the present moment, there is no problem. That was also one of those ones I tried to wrap my head around it. And that's one of those things people, I mean, there's only so far you're going to get trying to think your way to understanding what this is. There's just an experiential part of it. And there's just an inner knowing part of it. You just know and you experience. You can get so far by thinking, and then your thinking isn't going to help you. At least I've never met anybody, we'll put it that way. I've never met anybody whose thinking took them to the place where they knew and where they really understood this idea of no problem in the present moment. I also kind of resisted that notion because my mind went to physical pain. And I thought, that is a problem. How can you say that if I'm in physical pain in the moment, that's not a problem? And then I can see you're already going, Danielle. For me, I had some really interesting experiences to do with that, because one thing was that what people, I guess, generally will call mindset now, like how I looked at that situation as being good or bad, right or wrong, for example, something to accept or avoid. And what I noticed was having experiences where if I didn't fight, if I didn't travel, if I just was present, there was no pain. I had a procedure done where I went to the hospital and they tried to do it the first day, and I was screaming blue murder. It was so painful. And the doctor said, well, we're not going to get anywhere. We're going to have you come back tomorrow. Now, most people might think, oh, I get an entire day to dread going back and be subjected to that kind of pain again. Fortunately, I didn't. I took everything I've learned, basically, and my experiences with presence, and knowing that there is no problem in the present moment. I went back the next day. They did the procedure again. There was absolutely no problem. I did feel pressure, but I didn't feel any pain at all. And just so that everybody knows, no painkillers, nothing. So it's just, you deal with it. And they couldn't believe it either, that I was the same person and it was the same procedure. But I wasn't the same person. I was 24 hours more experienced. I was 24
Gone
hours
through a transition.
more present. Yes, I'd gone through a transition. I had returned to now, and not to fear and not to fight and not to whatever else was in the mixture. And just what was right now was just a procedure. And there was no pain. And there are so many examples of this kind of thing, where I was also at a course where we were learning hypnotherapy. And I was one of the people who was called up. And the fellow had nails, and he dug his fingernails into my hand as hard as he could. And I couldn't feel anything at all, because I wasn't afraid. I didn't need to fight. I was mostly curious. No pain. People walk barefoot on burning coals. I've done that. Didn't get burned. It's amazing. As far as transformation goes, as far as problem-free goes, when we are able to be present and without all of the extra baggage, I guess you could call it. Eckhart would call it the pain body, without allowing ourselves to be influenced by past or future, but just being present to what is now, which is optimistic, creative, curious. Totally different experience. I just wanted to bring that in, because it can be difficult to even consider the possibility that the present moment can be no problem. And that's just the pain side of it. It's also whether I judge the present moment as, which is basically I want it or I don't. Mm-hmm. Instead of it is, this is it. This is what I have. I can fight it or I can be with it. Which would I prefer? Which one is probably, to use those words, easiest to deal with? So I just thought I'd bring that into the mixture. And again, understanding it with your mind, with your thoughts, that's one side of it, but it won't quite take you there without the experience of it and the knowing of it.
Yeah, I agree that was part of the process of me getting to understand that statement, was I had to get beyond thought, because every time I thought about it, it created a problem. Right?
Yeah, we can always find examples of how it's not true.
Yes.
Or at least seems not true.
Yeah. And even to be in pain and not have it dissipate is possible, and still not view it as a problem, right? Like, I think there was a fairly significant transformation in my life at one point when I stopped looking at disease as illness, but as dis-ease, as something that I could move through into ease, and that there was a purpose, or it wouldn't have happened, right? Like, that's a totally different view than my body is betraying me, right? And doing things that I don't want it to do, and why is it doing this, right? And then that's how I felt when I was injured or ill previous to whenever this transformation took place. It was a few years ago now. So I move through things much more easily, just because I don't have to judge it as, or I don't have to defend against it. Yeah, I don't judge it as something I have to defend myself against.
I like when I'm first introduced to these types of ideas, either that the present moment is optimistic, that's a concept. That there are no problems in the present moment, that's a concept. And our conditioning, our mind immediately wants to know, is that right or wrong? Is that true or false? Is that good or bad? Is it divine or evil? We live in a very, very binary world. And in NLP, there is a a binary choice that we make with a new concept like that. Is it useful or not useful? Does it serve us or does it not serve us? And one way I would certainly say that both of these concepts that you guys have introduced are highly useful is they serve as kind of a catalyst to pause and become present. You know, if we're and those things may kind of rear their head in very interesting moments, like when things are going poorly, that may show up going, well, there are no problems in the present moment. And that might be the inner critic calling BS. It's saying, you know, look, here you are in the present moment and you have this problem. So that concept is clearly false. And we can all hear the mind making that argument. Yeah, our inner critic, blah, 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 blah. However, if we just merely use that as a catalyst and ask ourselves if this was true, not even necessarily saying that you have to believe it, but if it was true, what in this moment are you missing? Are you not paying attention? Are you overlooking? Have you not yet fully considered? And that space merely in the present moment may be enough for a transformation to happen. You know, it may just create enough space that a new flash of insight, a new aha moment can kind of join the proceedings. And now all of a sudden, instead of only having these two binary options, maybe we've got 15 different options, and we can start kind of playing around with the energy of those and getting to the point where we go, okay, I know what to do here. And, you know, proceed a little bit differently, if that makes sense. So I think, you know, I can hear people, I did the very same thing. That's why it is so present for me, because the moment that both of you guys introduced that concept, I could hear my brain going, is that true? And starting to do some sort of like a little analysis. And I just kind of swept that to the side and said, better question, is it useful? And I think in any time that we can use any tool that will bring more resources and more space to bear to a situation that we are finding ourselves pushing against the flow of life, then it's highly useful and is a good opportunity to just kind of go, okay, where's my head at? You know, well, I'm 6 weeks out into the future, worried that XYZ could happen and I could be in real trouble. But right now, nothing's going on. So maybe that's just information to say, okay, insulate yourself against this possible bad outcome that you don't want, that might happen 6 weeks from now if you stay on your current path. And that could be a good use right there, and transform what appears to be a problem into a catalyst for inquiry and a catalyst to bring ourselves present again. And I think in that way, it's very, very useful.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of, I was thinking about this a little bit earlier as well, how we often, when we're speaking, we talk about feelings as information. Not as proof, but as information. And in the context of the present moment as problem or not, and pain, for example, physical pain, is this, what's the information? Pain is like feelings, information. So when you talk about it being a catalyst, it's like binary, okay, yes, no, or
it's 12 hours.
Plethora of possibilities. And am I willing to meet the whatever it is, pain or whatever, with curiosity? And optimism, not in the way that, I mean, what do we mean by optimism? I'm not saying color it with what do you call it, rose-colored glasses.
Mhm.
Not Pollyanna positive, but the idea of curiosity is inherently positive, inherently optimistic. There's something being created. There's something interesting. So whatever is in the moment, whether it feels physically painful or emotionally painful or not, it's information. And meeting that with curiosity or not, or just allowing it, just being there with it. We don't have to be curious. It is a useful tool often, but we don't have to be curious.
Yeah.
We don't have to be anything, really, do we? Ever.
Well, it sounds like maybe we have to be change. We have to be transition because our bodies are constantly doing that, right? And it is something that I think people have an immediate resistance to transition and transformation often. If it takes us outside of our familiar zone, which is often wrongly called our comfort zone, because a lot of times it's not comfortable, right? But it's familiar, so we're comfortable with it. We don't like change. We don't look forward to change, and yet we are change, as Bobby described at the beginning of this talk, right? We are constantly changing. We are in fact change. It's part of the body that we live in, that we are constantly in that state of transition from new cells, from discarding old cells, from breathing in molecules that maybe we shared with ancient beings, or maybe it was stardust, or right. I mean, there's so much that we don't focus on as part of our familiar zone, as a part of our comfort, that we actually don't acknowledge, because like I said, it's a good thing. We don't have to control all of those types of bodily functions. But when we look at a bigger transition or a bigger transformation, something like where we're moving our home, that's something that we could be looking forward to, we could be dreading, or we could just be with, right? And then more possibilities arise as you make those different choices in what filter you choose to put it through, or whether you decide not to have a filter for it, whether it's rose colored glasses or it's, and within my uh, relationship with my husband, I kind of like that, because I tend to be a rose colored glasses kind of person, and he tends to be a worst case scenario kind of person, because that's how his job trained him. Like, he was in life-saving equipment, right, or life-saving fire safety systems, so he kind of had to do that. Like, worst case scenario is people die here, we have to do this right. It has to be functioning, it has to be tested, it has to be inspected, and it has to be right. So it makes a nice balance. And I was talking to my sister the other day and saying that, like, I have come to appreciate that about him, whereas initially I didn't, right? Like, you're always so negative, you're always well, in training horses that might be right, you maybe shouldn't do that. But in everyday life, it'll bring up things that I would not have been prepared for. Like Bobby was talking about, the thing that's going to happen 6 weeks out. My husband will see that and let me know about it, right? I may not see it, but then I can choose what I'm going to do to um, consider that possibility. And yeah, it makes for a nice balance, because there would be things that would blindside me, right? Or things that, it's interesting how, we're attuned to what our skill set is. So his skill set is this pipe type thing, right? And he will hear a drip in the house that I'm like, what? It'll be in the basement under the floor and he can hear it because that's what he's tuned to. I hear a baby, right? Like that's what I'm tuned to. I raised babies, and if I have a baby in the house, I'm going to hear that. He's gotten better at that, and I've gotten better at the drips, but it's what we were familiar with, what we focused on and became present to in our skill set. So.
I love that. And I think it's such a beautiful description because there's not a judgment about right or wrong, better or worse. It's just different.
Mm-hmm.
And there's space for it all. Obviously, it's what our conditioning is, what we're used to, what feels uncomfortable, what we resist. Yeah, and it's I think you describe the journey that many people go through where you need to sort of find, or you're looking for a way to coexist, come together, where each person's strengths or differences or whatever are given space. You find this sort of, I don't want to call it common ground, but a fundamental ground where
almost a mutual respect.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
I see that a lot with financial advisors who think about teaming up together. Very often, two people who are almost exactly wired the exact same way. So they have an instant rapport and they get along great. They see the world the same way. And there's just an instant camaraderie, and they think to themselves, we should partner up. We would make a great partnership. And if they happen to come to me, one of the things that I do is I run them through a personality profile so we can look and see how well will they actually work and play together. But when they, when the report comes back that they are very much wired in the exact same way, that gives me a cause for a pause, because having two of the exact same thing, if they have the exact same strengths and weaknesses, then that's not really an ideal partnership necessarily. To me, Danielle, what you're describing is two really wonderful puzzle pieces that fit together well, the optimist and the pessimist. If they can get together and find harmony with one another, now you've got real strength. You always need to have, if you have a boardroom full of optimistic people, you need at least one kind of curmudgeon on there, somebody who's good at computing the worst case scenario. Because for the optimist, it often never comes up. That's why they're optimistic. They can only see the beautiful outcome, and they don't even necessarily consider what could go wrong. So it's nice to have a complementary skill set there, which I think some of the stuff that we've been talking about, to the degree that we are just one person and we have one worldview, a lot of these interrupts that we've been talking about, that the present moment is optimistic or the present moment is change. Or I heard another one that the only real constant is that we're always stepping into the unknown, that really in every moment is we're standing at the field of all possibilities, and there's all these probability amplitudes. And we might look at one of them and say, this is what's probably going to happen. And that's probably going to be right. If I get up to go to the bathroom, I'm probably going to make it there. But who knows? I may not. Could get lost on the way or something.
Trip over a dog.
Yeah. That actually is especially with my new one who loves to weave between my legs.
Oh my goodness.
That probability has increased recently, yes.
I'm going to bring in a little, another possibility here. There are a couple of things I'd like to touch on, but this idea of optimism and pessimism and sort of finding common ground, or maybe even enough common ground where we also give space to the uncommon ground. Tony Robbins, you mentioned NLP, Bobby. Tony Robbins, this is like, 30 years ago, I think I was at one of his events where he talked about mismatchers. And it was basically the extreme pessimist, if we put it that way, if we just use those words. And like there would always be the person in the group who nothing is ever right. Like there's always something wrong with pretty much everything. And I actually thought that was pretty brilliant because I was in a situation a long time ago where there was a person who I understood was a mismatcher. And so I went to talk to my boss about that. And I said, don't bring this person in on the brainstorming meetings because they'll kill every idea before it's even out of your mouth. But once you've got the ideas, take them to this person. And this person will find anything that isn't going to work and what's best and what isn't. And every time there was something, it was like, run it by this person, run it by this person. And the person ended up being so valuable, and the entire dynamic of the office space changed, because it's not necessarily easy being around a person who just kills every idea, right? And every conversation. This person became very valuable and probably saved us a lot of heartache and money. So there's also the extreme of the very positive, where everything's wonderful. It's almost like, okay, you need your feet a little bit more on the ground. However, anytime it's the opposite in a way. It's anytime everything seems black. And there are many situations we could bring up that are like that seem just dark. Having a person who finds the light in pretty much everything can save lives. Mm-hmm. But it might seem out of place, or it might seem, again, we talk about resistance, right? Making it into a problem instead of getting curious about where's the value. How can this be, as you say, Bobby, useful, helpful?
Yeah.
So I just thought I'd mention that, because even at the extreme, there's value. It's where's the silver lining? Where's the kintsugi, the gold in it? But now I'd like to jump to something completely different. Okay?
Okay.
Because we're talking about transition and transformation. And I actually commented on someone else's post on Facebook earlier about this. Again, with the resistance to what is, and not having built up the presence muscle enough, perhaps, to be with a situation so it's painful or something. Or you mentioned even, Bobby, something in 6 weeks that you don't want. A lot of people want transition. They want transformation, and they want it now. I want to change now. And I get this, clients coming to me and it's like, fix me now as quickly as possible. I want this to stop. Whatever's going on, I want it to stop. I've had enough. And again, the idea of the present moment and wanting it to be something else, or wanting something else, and the present moment revealing something that is helpful, and people who are in a hurry not seeing it, not picking up on it because they're in a hurry. I just wanted to bring that into the mixture because I find that shows up in my work with my clients, and even just people I meet really often. It's like, I hate my life, I'm in pain, my relationship's not working, whatever. Fix it now. And sometimes it's possible to make transformations really quickly. usually when there's already some sort of opening. However, there's the idea of slow, or that moment by moment may be or seem slow. And big change or even little change can't happen quickly or doesn't. What do you guys have to say about that, if anything?
Well, seems to me that when change happens, change that people have been struggling with, that often is the result of like a new insight or a flash of intuition or a new perspective or the mother of all aha moments. And in that case, the actual change, it seems to me, happens in the blink of an eye. It can absolutely be something that we're focusing on for a very long time before that insight occurs. But I read a book one time, Mara Gleason wrote it. She's a 3P person, and her book was called One Thought Away. And it was about the fact that we are always only one thought away from a new insight, a new emotion, a new realization, a new perspective on a vexing problem that we may be facing, and that things really can happen in an instant. But, there's no question. I've talked here about my struggles with calling 1-800 IT support lines, and how I used to lose my shit when I would call those people. And I think I've shared on this podcast that it was a hypno session where I was the client and I was working with a hypnotist friend of mine, and went and looked at that. And the insight that I got was what was actually happening was I was still stuffing down anger or frustration or some sort of negative emotion that I wasn't dealing with. I was avoiding it. So I was like holding the volleyball beneath the surface of the pool and standing there. And my unconscious mind, when it became time for me to vent, my unconscious mind would raise the thought that, hey, this particular IT problem that you were working with a couple months ago still isn't fixed. Why don't you take this little window of time that you've got, call 1-800, you're going to lose your shit, and talk to a customer service representative. And I would do that, and I would lose my stuff. The problem still wouldn't get solved, but I had vented. And once I had that insight, that I wasn't getting angry because of the incompetence of the 1-800 number. I mean, that may have contributed to it in some small way, but really I was making the call because I wasn't dealing with my anger. And what that little insight allowed me to do is have a different relationship with things that frustrated with me and things that angered me. And I started looking at them more at the way that I said with the useful thing of your guys' concepts. What am I missing here? What am I overlooking? What do I believe in this moment that is causing this frustration? Because you can sit there in the present moment and go, okay, I don't have a problem right now. My computer's working fine. I can do everything that I need to do. Yes, this one little problem is still a problem, but it's really not a problem because I've got enough workarounds. And it's just a limitation of the particular piece of hardware that I've got. So now all of that is gone, and I've got a better, more direct way of interacting with the anger when it arises. And if you think of emotions, we have that judgment around emotions. They're good or bad, they're evil or divine, they're right or they're wrong. They can cause problems or they can deliver a solution. But if you just look at it from the standpoint of, if this energy that I'm experiencing had a message for me, what would that message be? And like, for example, if I get thirsty, there is an emotion that arises in me that we call thirst. And what that is asking is, take a drink. You're a little dehydrated, and you'll feel a little bit better if you hydrate. And the transition happens, the transformation happens. It's easy and it's effortless. But every once in a while, we get problems that we kind of get stuck on. And that tends to have a deeper meaning. One of the things that I find with my clients is a lot of the emotions that they want to get rid of are just asking for their attention in one particular area of their life. And once we get down to that core cause, the symptoms that they're having to cope with and manage just dissolve. They go away. I mean, it doesn't always happen, but it often does. And it's worth looking into. And if it doesn't work the first time, try something else.
Yeah, a couple things came to mind as you were talking, Miriam. One of them was that and when I first got in recovery, I think there was actually like a mug or something. Anyway, it was a saying. I want patience, and I want it now. Right. So that was kind of where a lot of people entering recovery were feeling that they wanted things to be better, and they wanted them to be better fast, and they knew they weren't gonna get better fast, that it was going to be a process to reestablish trust with themselves and trust with in other relationships, and possibly physical comfort and home and all of those kinds of things that need to be reestablished. And also, there's a song that we sing in our church that's, I will only go as fast as the slowest part of me feels safe to go. So I think that's in sort of what Bobby was describing there in the second example, where if there is an emotion that is not letting go of you, right, or you're not willing to just let it be and be with it, then that doesn't feel safe to you for some reason, and that will slow the process of transformation. And there doesn't have to be a judgment against that, right? Like, we can still bring up that curiosity. What is it that it wants to tell me? What is it that it wants to show me? And go at whatever pace it actually feels safe to go. You're going to actually be able to retain the transformation, because sometimes we make those big transformations and then we slide back because we haven't gone at a pace that addresses everything that was part of that transformation, and we weren't present to it. So we'll have those, not necessarily a relapse, but at least a slip or something that lets us know that we have more to be present with, and more to pay attention to within our processing of that. Yeah, and sometimes we just are able to do it.
There's, for me, I get curious about why do you want to go quickly? What is it that has you wanting to move more quickly? Like, I want to be over this now. I want to be finished with this now. I don't want this to be like this. What's there that has you wanting to move quickly? So, put another way, is there something in this equation you're actually trying to avoid finding out about or experiencing? This
And
idea of being with the feeling, or being with the thought, or being with the memory, or being with whatever it is. not being. It's like, get it over with. It doesn't, I will say it this way, it doesn't always work that way, because getting over something tends to be more jumping over it. So it's still there, as Bobby, you were talking about losing your cool on the 1-800 calls because there was something else going on. It's like moving quickly over something doesn't mean you're done with it necessarily. It likely is still there and will show up, as Bobby, you described, in other situations, letting you know that there's something there and go towards that instead of away from it. And you may not even need to resist it at all. So that is one thing that will often show up in my sphere, will be, why quickly? What is it that has you wanting to move quickly?
That was interesting that came up with the horse that I bought last year. So this horse has been through a lot of trauma, and that's how she deals with things. Like, here we go, right? She didn't want to stand still. She doesn't want to take her time about anything. Anything just needs to be done quickly. And because she's willing to go into new situations quickly, I think someone that didn't know a lot about horses would think the horse was really brave. But she's not courageous. She's avoidant. She's just trying to get it over with so it'll be done and not hurt her. Right. So that was an interesting reflection that I had to take a little time with. Okay? Like, am I being courageous or am I being avoidant? There's different reasons for speed, right? Like when I wanted to be well from my state of addiction, that's a whole different thing. That was a courageous action, right? And that took commitment and it took persistence, and yeah, I could want to be further than I was, and all of us did. I think we just wanted that discomfort to go away. The things we had done to ourselves, we wanted fixed, right? And that's just the process of it. I understand the desire. It also is not a probability, as Bobby said earlier. There's lots of possibilities it could happen, right? And some people do immediately get clean in their, they call them on a pink cloud, right? And everything about life is wonderful, and they're grateful and they're happy and everything is going well. And yeah, and we would tell them to enjoy the pink cloud. Not everybody gets one, and you don't know how long it's going to be around. So appreciate it for what it is.
Yeah, I mean, if especially, I'm imagining anyway, especially if life has seemed really rough, then a reprieve from that in any form would feel very welcome. And we don't necessarily, I'm generalizing here now, don't necessarily realize that it might be detrimental. Somebody I know was riding his motorcycle. This is not the same kind of thing, but it's similar kind of thing. He's riding his motorcycle, and he went into this sort of ecstasy. And he's driving, and it's like, oh, life is so good. It's wonderful and free and all of this, whatever was going on in him. And he crashed. Fortunately, only hurting like a tiny little part of his body. But it was enough of a wake-up call to go, okay, ecstasy is not presence. I don't think that's the bliss that Eckhart Tolle was talking about, that kind of sort of pink cloud, as you mentioned. Yeah, enjoy it and be aware, be with what is. It's where you're still here. And there's a reason for that. So, but it's perfectly understandable, at least from my perspective, anybody who experiences a reprieve, even a blissful reprieve from something that has been or been experienced as very painful for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
It makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Not
being
budget at all.
present when you're driving has come up recently too, because we all do that, right? Like we arrive somewhere and we're like, I don't remember driving that stretch. And so that the saying they gave my mom after my mom had obliterated 2 or 3 cars was drive like you're doing surgery.
Mm,
And that really worked for her because she's a doctor.
that's
So
brilliant.
she was able to do that. But I use it. I still use it. Like if I'm getting off in my brain somewhere and I'm not focused on driving, I'm like, oh, surgery. We're doing surgery here. So I think that yeah, you want to be able to enjoy the sights. You want to be able to enjoy the feel of being on your motorcycle and still be in presence while you do it. So I think a lot of the transformations that we experience require that kind of presence from time.
Mm. Yes.
Not constantly, but
yeah. Well, we are at our hour. So, as I usually do, does anybody have anything they'd like to share, anything you're offering, or anything you'd like people to know about before we end the call?
I don't really have anything that I'm currently offering, but I do have 2 individual coaching spots available, which is the first time that I've had individual coaching spots available in a while. So if you are interested, you can reach out to me on Facebook or at the information that is being broadcast on the screen right now. We can begin the conversation. All of my new relationships begin with a in-depth discovery call to find out where you are and where you're looking to go and find out if we're a good fit. So that the way that if you're curious, just reach out and we'll get that discovery call on the books, and that's complimentary.
Thank you, Danielle. You have anything you'd like to share?
I'm pretty much in the same position. I have some one-on-one spots available, and I have talked to somebody about doing a retreat this summer on the horse farm. So hopefully that'll be in the works soon. She does yoga and sound healing.
Oh, wow.
I'm hoping to do the sound healing at least with horsemanship. So I'll let you know when that's ready to go.
How about you, Miriam? What's going on in your world? What are you offering?
Thank you, sir. I have also one-to-one spaces for a couple of people. If you'd like to have one-on-one coaching with me, we can have a conversation about that, see if we're a fit. I'm also relaunching Undefiable, which is my 12-week online program. Mm-hmm. And that is basically to, as we talk about, get more present, bring your strengths and your confidence forward so that, if I use a metaphor, when the storms hit, you bend, you don't break. And when you do bend, you come back up again. So if you're interested in knowing more about Undefiable, then you are welcome to contact me at the information below. And I've started a new kind of healing session. And it is called Channeled Soul Connection Healing. And it involves channeled drawing. They're healing drawings, and you can use them after the session. It is a general energy healing session. It is also a channeled drawing that you can use after the session to continue your healing journey. And if you're curious about that, you are more than welcome to contact me again at the information on the screen. And there we have it. That is our talk for today, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who are on replay, let us know. And if you have any questions or comments, things that you'd like to share, please write them in the comments and we will get back to you. Next week, we will be back with another topic, and I have no idea what that is, but we will let you know on our page or in our free group on Facebook. So thank you again to Bobby Cobb and Danielle McMahon. I'm Miriam Siegel, and we are the Presence Posse. Bye for now.